How's it going, summoners, and welcome back to another ProGuides Wild Rift video. Today, we got 5 insane tips and tricks to climb faster to the elo you desire. So let's not keep you waiting any further and just let's go. The first trick is something rather obvious, but people usually don't like to do this. It's abusing the meta champions. So in theory, you can hit any elo with any champion, but it's going to be 10 times easier with strong meta champions compared to the off-meta champions. The reason for that is rather obvious. The inherent strength of certain picks is just significantly stronger than the strength of other champions. Let's just imagine you played a support role in solo queue. And why would you ever pick something like a Soraka when you could pick something like a Janna? First, on paper, both champions seem relatively similar, but playing Soraka actually requires your teammates to be competent enough to use the healing you got, whereas Janna can do so much more. Janna can not only protect her allies from the enemy team engaging on them, she can also make plays happen. Her tornado, her second ability, her third ability and her ultimate ability are all great tools, either defensive or aggressive, depending on how the Janna is playing. And on the flip side, for the Soraka, your teammates need to understand that you can heal them, because they won't participate in a fight once they get a little bit lower because they simply forget that you can heal them. It sounds comical, but it is actually the way it is. As stupid as it sounds. However, you have to keep in mind that this idea is strictly about gaining elo. It's not necessarily about improving at the game playing just one champion that is the strongest champion at that time. However, if you look into the long run or into the future, you might see that if the meta changes a lot and you play a lot of different champions, you'll get to know all of them and therefore a better understanding of the game. It just takes a little bit longer. But now let's take a small break for a question of the day. What champion do you currently love the most and why? Let me know in the comments below, and while you're at it, don't forget to hit the like and subscribe button for more future content. Since we've already talked about abusing the meta, it's now about learning the fundamentals of laning. For point 1, you need to ask yourself who is stronger at what point and why. So for this, we can ask ourselves very simple things. Are we a ranged champion or are we a melee champion? Without taking any other variables into consideration, a ranged champion always has the advantage over the melee champion. That is the nature of the difference between both of them. However, you'll encounter situations in which the melee champion is stronger than the ranged champion, simply because of cooldowns, wave states, or any other variable. And now it's about you understanding and learning to process those variables. So let's just start with level 1. What are you doing level 1 when you're a ranged champion? Are you hitting the enemy and in return are getting blasted by the enemy minions? Or are you zoning the enemy by resetting the minion aggro over and over again by abusing brushes? And what are you doing after? Because now, since you've started to deal damage to the enemy has to respect that. Cannot magically regain those HPs without going back or using any kind of specific ability or summon a spell. And then as a consequence, it's up to you to punish him even more due to this HP differential. So let's say you hit level 2 earlier than him and he's already a little bit damaged by you. Why should he be allowed to get minion XP and minion gold? What stops you from zoning him? And then it becomes just a patience game of if he wants to go for minions. Because now let's move on to our next point of this category. Don't just mindlessly shove minions into the enemy. Waves can serve a purpose. So as all of you know, minions grant XP and gold even if you don't kill them. If you don't kill them, you only get 50% of the gold. For junglers it's a little bit less, but it doesn't matter here right now. So why should you just mindlessly shove the wave into the enemy tower where he's supposedly safe and able to farm those minions? Unless you're going to dive him, of course. But without any assistance in the earlier stages of the game, unless the enemy really int it, how can you reliably dive the enemy? Well, you just can't. And if you get the wave stuck in front of his tower, he'll get free XP and you can't do anything about it. So why don't you just try to slow push the first, second and crash the third wave into the enemy tower while continuously dealing damage to the enemy. Then you can make a choice to help your jungler at the scuttle crab because you'll be in time for that while the enemy is stuck on the tower, or you just go base and come back to lane. And now comes the next trick. Please don't just push it back again, because as the wave bounces back into you, you can now freeze it. And now let's talk about why this is such a good strategy. For one, you have already reset in most situations and spent your gold. The enemy laner was not able to spend his gold. And if he chooses to now go base and then spend his gold, he's going to lose an entire wave and has to overextend shortly after. Which you can then abuse by calling your jungle over to farm him for free. And once you get into that stage, it's impossible for the enemy to recover. He has to leave lane. And from this point on, we go to the next big point number 3, respecting the jungle. So we already talked about a matchup and what you have to do. So now let's just imagine you already know how your matchup is supposed to go and you want to play aggressively. Therefore you can't forget the mandatory ward in the early game, which is supposed to keep you safe. Otherwise, you're just going to get farmed for your hyper-aggression. Basically, think of this ward as a checklist and use it as a requirement to go hyper-aggressive on the map. So number 1, do you have vision on the map that can spot the enemy and which allows you to play aggressive? Or number 2, have you seen the enemy on one side of the map and can therefore do something whatsoever? Or last but not least, can you reliably kill both of them without any problem? If you got the answer to this, you can therefore just adjust your game plan. And there's one more thing you have to understand. Once you have that vision established, it's important to use it. You want to lean towards the correct side at all times, because you don't want to be caught snoozing on the job because all the previous work you've done will be for naught. But what does leaning to a specific side even mean? So if you have vision on the top side of the map, you know if the enemy is coming from this direction. So please lean towards it, stay on that side as much as you can. Because you will see the enemy, for example coming from the ward, if it's the jungler, you can just walk away. In the case he's coming from the side you don't have a ward on, you have enough time and space to react to walk into safety. But please don't fall victim to the typical bait there is in solo queue. Straight up running back to your tower isn't always going to save you. In fact, it's probably going to kill you more times than it's going to save you. Rather think about where there's no enemies and where you can just walk towards to. So if your top lane has an advantage and the enemy is stuck under tower but you're getting ganked from the bottom side of the map, what stops you from just running up there into then your own jungle? Because the enemy has to follow you, your top laner can back you up, and what can the enemy do? Nothing. But this point also gets us to the next big point. Stop looking exclusively at your own lane, think of the bigger picture. Winning lane is really not everything, and a lot of times it's just about who's able to influence the map better. And that is something a lot of Baron laners fall victim to all the time. They win lane with their stronger lane picks but fail to accomplish anything on the map. They're so stuck in their microsphere that they are not doing anything that is going to help the team or themselves in a way that are going to win the game. Just accumulating gold isn't enough. It's using that gold properly. So let's just imagine you have a Gragas on your team and the enemy team has a Fiora on your team. Well, the matchup surely isn't the nicest for the Gragas. It's very annoying for him to play, but it's manageable. All he has to do is follow a certain set of rules, and then he can survive and impact the later fights better than the Fiora could ever do. So even if the Fiora is 2,000 or 3,000 gold ahead at like 10 minutes, it is not going to instantly end the game. For one, the Fiora will still struggle to dive the Gragas on her own under the tower. He can just be very safe and cleared away from a distance by using his Q and the AP ratios for it. And as we go into the teamfight situations, the Gragas can influence the fight so unbelievably much by just using his ultimate properly. With this, he can either engage into the enemy or disrupt the entirety of the enemy's teamfight composition. And once the enemy is isolated, he can jump in and make sure that the most important target is instantly killed. Whereas the Fiora, well, she's going to try to dash in, and if she gets caught by it, she's still relatively squishy and she struggles with dealing damage to many people. But now let's talk about quickly if your lane is in a state in which you cannot physically play anymore. Remember the part about the freezing thing and you cannot break out of it? First, ask for help. But if there's no help possible because your jungler or any teammate is on the other side of the map, rotate. Don't stuck yourself in a situation which you cannot win. You're losing, but slowly. And if you approach the wave to trying to fix it by yourself, you'll just get yourself killed, which makes everything 10 times worse. Rather, look at the map and look what you can do in the meantime. And last but not least, something that is almost always an issue in solo queue. Building the best possible items. Building the right items in the right sequence under the right conditions can also be considered a part of a player's skill, because you have to adjust what you need in most of the situations. Yes, don't get me wrong, a lot of champions have a default build that you can mostly always go, but there are still parts of those builds that you need to adjust to be optimal in terms of power. But how can you get to those builds? Number 1, please don't just copy builds from the leaderboards. Think about the items, compare builds from multiple people, and always ask yourself if there's a better alternative. And you may ask me why. If you don't understand why a build is in a certain way ordered, or why certain items are in this build, you cannot really play to the build's strength. because you don't know what the build strength is. And most of the time, the items aren't even optimal, because people just like to build items that are recommended or the higher people on the leaderboard go, because they assume they know what they're doing. But you have to be very careful when you do this, because just taking champion points into consideration can really be a big bait. So I'd rather have you start to actively think about what you're building and why you're building it, and then losing a few games because of it, but then reaching a higher understanding of why you're doing this, and then winning most of your games in the future. And that concludes today's video. Thank you all for watching, and if you enjoyed the video, make sure that you don't forget to like and subscribe. Done? Perfect. Then see you tomorrow for more Challenger content.